I first work with athletes, one of the things I ask them is, where do you play your sport? And if I'm talking to soccer players, they're like, look at me like weird, like, okay, we play out there on the playing field. And I say, no, you don't play soccer on the playing field. And they look at me like, okay, some village definitely lost their idiot. But when I point to my brain, it starts to dawn on them. Yeah, of course, soccer is managed by the brain. I mean, there's this amazing computer in our brain that has software that is designed to produce soccer. And what we're trying to do with our athletes, what I'm trying to do with my athletes, is to put them into environments where they are exposed to greater levels of dynamics that help them grow their software, the robustness of their software, so it goes to 2.1 and 3.1 and so on and so forth. But the problem with the coaching environment is most coaches have a limited amount of time with their athletes, and that's a problem because then they get very uncomfortable if they are asked to work in any elements or areas that are outside things that don't focus narrowly on the sport that they're working with. And the premise behind everything that I'm going to talk to you about today is I feel like there are things that you can do outside of the sport-focused environment that will enhance your ability to get your athletes to become more effective in a much faster period of time. So what does that look like? What does that entail? If we're preparing athletes' performance, we might consider these three areas, but I'm going to take this middle area, which is the cognitive thinking mind, which would be the psychology behind performance, and move it off to the side because I want to spend more time talking about the neural development or the physical brain or that computer or the software managed by that computer and how that physical brain can impact the physical development and the performance side of the equation. If we had to categorize sports, I would sort of categorize them this way. There would be pattern recognition or tactical centered sports. There would be fitness centered sports, and there would be skill centered sports. And they all sort of approach training and athlete preparation a little different. But the bottom line is that all categories are enhanced by brain training. But if you take a look at the graphs, you can see how pattern-centered, fitness-centered, and skill-centered sports sort of approach things a little different in terms of the tactical component, the conditioning component, and the skill component. If we look at how we might impact brain training on the physical development side, this might be what we would consider the traditional model. We've got conditioning, strength, power work, peak performance preparation technique that would sort of incorporate all the work we might focus on our athletes. And if we're looking at that 20 hours a week or that limited training amount of time, we're very uncomfortable stepping outside this zone. But how can we augment or add some spice to that brain training element? To do that, I'd add functional athleticism to the equation. Functional athleticism is taking athletes and putting through a series of exercises or sequences or singles exercises that put a high level of stress on core stability, balance, structural integrity of the athlete, and really challenges the athlete's brain to manage the exercise routines they're being put through. And they might not be sport specific, but the brain being put through those types of environments, it learns how to manage that environment, and it takes that learning and knowledge and brings it back to the sport specific movement. So for example, we've had athletes go through ballet training once a week. I put a swimming class through ballet training once a week just to improve their general core stability, connectivity, and athleticism. And it really took time away from swimming, but it augmented the brain's ability to manage the swimming performance. To take that one step further, I would add two more elements to it. The first element would be what I call contrast training. So contrast training to me is this combination of alternating between a high level resisting type movements with free-flowing normal sport-specific movements. And the idea being that when you work on this perfect pattern-based movement with a level of resistance, it really helps the brain really hone in and focus in on the pattern. And then when you alternate it with a free-falling sport-specific movement at a heart rate level of say 140 to 160, you find an enhanced understanding of how to manage that pattern of movement. And if you did say 45 minutes of work and you went 5 minutes over here and 10 over here, and you alternated that back and forth 3 times, what happens is the brain just gets better and better at taking what it learns from the resistance-based environment and translating it just directly into the sport-specific based environment. And you see this improved economy of movement. They look so much better. So rather than say doing 45 minutes of heart rate work and maintain it between 140 and 160 heart rate a minute, you alternate back and forth between the two, and what it does is it helps make the brain more robust in terms of learning and understanding and managing that pattern of movement. So we step back and look at mixed training. It's another area that can really be added into this conditioning side. And I feel like the conditioning, especially the conditioning sports, a large chunk of what they do is based in conditioning. Even some of the pattern-based sports are conditioning based. So mixed training, again, is another element that is very, very similar. It has a very, very similar effect, except now we're doing sort of non-sport specific based exercises, again, that are challenging the balance stability, core stability, et cetera, really helping the brain grow and become more robust. And again, we're alternating it with this free-flowing sport-specific pattern. And again, if we're going, say, 5 minutes here and 10 minutes here, and we're going this 45 minutes and we're trying to maintain a heart rate of between 140, 160 in that range, then again, what you're going to find is that everything it learns here is going to translate directly to what it applies there. And you're going to see a much greater economy of movement. Again, if you just did 45 minutes of just this type of stuff, you'd see what you normally see. But when you alternate back and forth, the brain is really adept at taking what it learns and using it in a very efficient way. And so this becomes a lot more efficient. It has a lot more economy base to it and is far more effective at what it's doing. So I'm not saying that when we take this conditioning package over here, that we just supplant it completely with these two types of training. I think we sort of augment it. And by augmenting it, we take away a lot of what I call kind of drudgery, onerous type work that's repetitive, and the athletes tend to switch off and they don't tune in nearly the same way as they should in terms of what they're doing as far as their technique is concerned. So when you add this contrast and this mixed environment, it makes it easier for them to focus in and concentrate, take ownership over what they're doing. And on top of that, you create a more robust environment for the brain to really, really take what it's learning in one environment and applying it to another environment. If we look at the neural side of the development, this might be more of a traditional model where we're doing a lot of skill pattern rehearsal to lay the groundwork for the performance rehearsal, where we're now performing at competition intensity or race intensity to really help the brain, really the software, really how to manage it and be economical at those types of intensities. So what can we do to enhance this area? We would add, and I think it should be always a component of your day-to-day training. You should, as a coach, be coming to training saying, okay, I'm going to challenge the brain on a physical level because I want to improve their functional athleticism, but I also want to challenge them on a mental level. So I want to put them in environments where I ask them to explore. I ask them to use critical thinking. I ask them to use cognitive flexibility to solve problems, because the more I put them into those types of environments, the more they take ownership over who they are, what they're doing, and what they're about. And as they take ownership and their brain gets better at solving problems and using cognitive flexibility to enhance physical performance, the better you are, the better your athlete's going to be to get to the levels that you're really pushing them to get to. So exploration, thinking like that is really important. But this last element, this VR training in all these different areas, VR training for pattern recognition or tactical-based sports. A lot of sports put the kids into just training environments, and they put them through repetitions and grids and formations and stuff like that to kind of mimic patterns that they might see in competition. But the reality is, especially with a digital world as it is today, I mean, you can take the virtual reality and you can create these environments in a virtual reality environment. So let's say you're in a pattern recognition practice, and you're asking them to run through, you might run through 10 reps in 30 minutes. Well, the reality is if you put those 10 reps into a VR environment, they can do 10 reps in a minute. they can do 100 reps in those 30 minutes. The number of times your brain can be exposed to exactly the decision making, the pattern recognition, the movement, the options are expanded exponentially when you add VR training to your brain training environment, especially in pattern recognition sports. In fitness-based sports that VR training is working on enhancing the pattern, the specific pattern of moving, like your running style or your swimming style, your technique type of thing. So you put the brain into a position where you put VR glasses on, and you're going to look at perfect patterns of moving, perfect patterns that you want your athletes to mimic, and you can get them to look at that on a loop, and you can get them to look 30 reps of it in a minute. I mean, you could put the VR glasses on for a minute and see those 30 reps, and the brain's exposed to 30 reps of that movement. Take the VR glasses off, and boom, you're in that movement. And your ability to kind of incorporate that movement and understand it and incorporate it into your system, in terms of what you know, is enhanced during that process. People that hit a softball or hit a baseball, if they're not using VR training to learn how to recognize patterns of movements in the pitches and motions and stuff that make a difference in terms of their recognition of what they're doing and how they're going to execute, it's an essential component, I think, in terms of what they're doing. So all these areas, I think, enhance, and I think everything I've talked about really enhance everything we can do to help our athletes move forward. To sum this up, I hope that I've challenged some coaches that might feel restrained or restricted or uncomfortable with stepping outside of sports-specific stuff, to really take a hard look at incorporating functional athleticism, some of the brain-based stuff that I've introduced today. And I haven't given you the details. I've given you the broad brush strokes by design because I want you to go look for it, go figure it out, go find out how to do it, or play with it, experiment it to some degree within your environment. Because when you do it that way, you actually learn and you begin to own it, just like your kids begin to own technique when you let them explore. So the last thing I'll point out is that much of what I've talked about today, it's important that you introduce this to at a much younger age than you might think. We might think this is more towards mature athletes, kids in high school or beyond type thing. But the reality is a large swath of what I've talked about today should have been introduced and fully embedded into the system prior to onset of peak height velocity. So before that period in time where kids hit that growth spurt during their teenage years. And the reason being is the brain evolves as an organism, and there's a pruning off, burning off period that occurs in those teenage years. And if you get all this in place prior to that point, you really enhance their ability to reach peak potential, peak organic potential. If you miss a lot of this and you wait too late to institute it, then your chances of getting there aren't as good.